Well, hemlocks are pretty important, especially in many of the areas in Georgia where they are. Hemlock trees are habitat for birds, seed sources, other things like that for some of the other wildlife. So the impact ecologically would be pretty heavy. Hemlock likes what they often say, they like wet feet, so they like to be usually you'll find them in fairly high concentrations along creeks. So hemlocks themselves, there's actually quite a few different things that are problems if you lose a lot of hemlocks.
Mm-hmm.
One of them is just purely from an aesthetic point of view. It can impact this area economically in terms of people buying land, developing land, wanting to vacation here, etc. Another impact would be its role in the creeks. Since they often line a lot of the creeks, they're very important in controlling erosion, keeping soil from washing into the creeks. It actually helps cool the creeks, and the cooling of the creeks is important because a lot of trout species in particular enjoy the cooler waters. So you remove a lot of hemlocks from creek banks, you might run the risk of too much sun exposure in the water, and that could possibly affect the temperature of the creeks. The woolly adelgid is it's a pest that affects hemlock trees. It's hemlock woolly adelgid's a native of Japan, and it came over to the United States in the early 50s. So it really didn't spread until the 80s, mid to late 80s. In the late 80s and 90s, it spread northward into first in the Shenandoah National Forest, and then north from that all the way into New England. And it didn't spread down here in the south until the early 2000s, probably 2000, 2001, 2002, and it came here in Georgia most likely somewhere around 2002. So it's spread, and in its wake, 90+% of the hemlock forests in Shenandoah National Forest have been destroyed by this, and it could go higher. There's kind of a two-prong approach in controlling this disease. One prong is what I think a lot of us think of as a short-term solution, because it's never really a long-term sustainable solution, and that's chemical control. What we do is not, it's a different approach. We raise biopredator beetles. We were the first lab in the state of Georgia to start raising these biopredators. So we've been raising these beetles. The operation started here in Maxwell Center. We basically used a storage closet to start. We made it climate controlled, and then what we did is there was an old faculty house on campus that was no longer being used, and so we remodeled it. We then started production in that lab, and that's where we're at right now. Beetle releases actually started in the late 90s up in the New England forests, and we've been doing them down here since the early 2000s. So and so we've had about, I know our lab's been releasing beetles, this will be our 10th year. But generally every year we release 20, 30, 40, 50,000, which is just a drop in the bucket of what we need. We've probably released 300,000 to 500,000 of those. So to us, success would look like if I were to walk in the forest and see hemlocks, see the little egg sacs of the adelgin on them, but at a low level. To me, that's what success looks like. If we don't do anything, I think mortality would be like what we saw up in Shenandoah National Forest.
Mm-hmm.
If we don't do anything, I think mortality will be like 90%. So maybe you'll have 10%, 5 to 10% surviving hemlocks. I do think, especially because we're in a situation that we Even though we've released 2.5 million beetles, that's probably still like putting a forest fire out with a thimble of water. To me, success would be if 30% of them live. That doesn't sound like success, but that's better than 0.